The use of whether hypothesis or research questions are among the parameters in research that sometimes bring about some contradiction and confusions among us researchers. As some institutions or the supervisors may ask you to provide the use of the research questions instead of the research hypothesis, and some may ask you to use the research hypothesis instead of the research questions. So these things may sometimes bring some demanding aspects of which we get ourselves in trouble. So I have tried to give you some relevant issues of which they will tell you why and what condition do we use the research questions, and what condition do we use the research hypothesis, and at what condition we can use the mixed style, whether the research questions and the research hypothesis within the same style. You may have different objectives, such that one objective could be stated in terms of the research questions, the other objective could be stated in terms of the research hypothesis, depending on the parameters of which you are going to assess. So how one can convert a research hypothesis into a research question, and how can be taken in from the research question to a research hypothesis, and what are the general considerations on this aspect. I will give you some relevant examples from these two scenarios so that you'll be in good position to tell and understand the things, and they will no longer acting as a hindrance for you. So be with us, try to follow these simple descriptive analytical ideas, and then you give some information that do with the two. Yes, once again, as far as normal as its research concept and technique is concerning, we had already presented to you the last times on the concept related to how can we make research objectives, particularly on aspect on how we can formulate research general objectives and specific objectives, and we gave you some specific hypothetical examples, particularly on how we can make that particular aspect. Today, under our YouTube, our channel is related to this concept and techniques in research, we are going to discuss with you on the research questions versus the research hypothesis. This is one of the critical areas of which we sometimes get ourselves in a jails of salt, particularly for us newer people in research. We get ourselves in a feelings, thinking particularly on what should I do. If my supervisor is frequently asking me to write an hypothesis rather than the research questions. So we sometimes get in trouble, get in salt and sink. We construct different styles on particularly how can I do, how can I achieve this particular area? What could be the difference that exists between these research questions or the research hypothesis? But worry not, our channel is, which is purely directed for you to provide some relevant information, particularly on research concepts and techniques. We figure out some areas where we find that some common mistakes of which we normally incur. So under these research techniques, under these questions and hypotheses, today we'll be discussing with you some useful information that will be helpful for your career. Under this, we are going to see under what condition do we prefer, do we opt to use the research questions, And what condition do we use the research hypothesis? What could be the difference between the research hypothesis and the research questions? What are the conditions? What are the criteria that will be used that will give you some areas, some directivity that, okay, under this kind of research, under these questions I am trying to answer, I should opt for the hypothesis or the research questions. So under this also we are going to discuss on aspect number 2, which is the relationship which exists between research questions, research objectives, and the research hypothesis. These three terms, the research question, research objective, and the research hypothesis, they are in fact related to each other. And no of these objectives can come from the vacuum, as each they depend one another. And wherever you are trying to formulate whether the research questions, it should have originated from the objectives, or when you are making the research objective, it should have been originated from the prior question that you were trying to ask yourselves to answer some aspect of your planned study. And when you are formulating the hypothesis should also be reflected from the research questions or the research objectives. So we will be giving you some inputs. How do these three terms, the research objectives, research question, the hypothesis, they depend each other. And before I go into detail, I will also have the highlight to give you simple descriptives on the types of the hypothesis, such that you will be in the position to know and tell, so that at the end I will not be in confusing style. And I will give you some, how do we write, how do we phrase a research hypothesis versus research questions. So writing the research questions and the research hypothesis, there are some languages, there are some we call research languages on how one can differentiate from the same sentence, but you phrase in such a way that it portrays some information that is an hypothesis rather than the questions. And how can I use the same sentence to write the question rather than hypothesis, or to use the hypothesis rather than the question? Under this scenario, we are going to see some neutrality kind of sentence or statement versus directivity kind of sentences. On the other style, I'm going to discuss a little bit on why do we test for the null hypothesis rather than the alternative hypothesis. Usually when we are conducting hypothesis testing, we opt for null hypothesis rather than the alternative hypothesis. Though in the modality on how we state the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis could be easily common for each and everybody, but there are some aspects of which they need some more the inputs, of which they will provide you a relevant information, and you will be in a good position to differentiate the things. And then while hypothesis testing, we have the concept of hypothesis testing, of which there is also a misconceptions between and most of us junior researchers. We simply adopt a simple statement that we accept the null hypothesis. This is statistically not true, and it's a long misconception. We prefer, that is advised to use, we fail to reject the null hypothesis rather than speaking we accept the null hypothesis. No, we don't accept the null hypothesis, rather we fail to reject the null hypothesis, because we prefer to reject null hypothesis. Failing to reject the null hypothesis, automatically we are accepting the null hypothesis. So I will give you some brief information on why do we use the word fail to reject the null hypothesis rather than accepting the null hypothesis. Then after the end of this, I will give you some basic tips of which they'll be useful for your career. But for more, you visit my YouTube. You go in YouTube as normal as how you do for watching other videos. Type and write the word research techniques and concept by Marunguja. Then you can also WhatsApp me through this number, which is this an Indian number, or you can use a Tanzanian number, of which you can also WhatsApp me. If you find this difficult, you can give email through my Gmail, gmarunguja77@gmail.com. I am available in the Ecology and Biodiversity Lab, TESPA University in India. So don't forget to subscribe, share, and comment. When we speak of these research questions, hypotheses, and objectives, as I said before, they depend each other. These three sentences, they depend each other. It is from the research objectives. When we have the research objectives, as I said in the last videos, we formulate now the research-specific objectives. We formulate the questions or the hypothesis. And each of these objectives should be accompanied by a corresponding specific questions or hypothesis. I remember I mentioned to you that there are different styles, different formats based on a particular institution. Some institution you may find you state one objectives, and within this objective you need to formulate several questions or the hypothesis, of which they will be giving some areas of interest to that particular objectives. What are you expecting to answer to that particular objectives? So you formulate several questions or several hypotheses based on a given objectives. Some universities, they have one-to-one style, of which you provide a single objectives with a specified research questions or the research objectives. So you can find this demonstration figure here. It shows that research questions, hypotheses, and objectives, they are in a cyclic nature. They depend each other. None of these 2 or 3 parameters could arise from the vacuum. There must be the title. From the title we construct the objective. From the objective we have the specific objective. From this specific objective we have to make the questions, we have to make the hypothesis. So they depend each other. There is nobody that can come out from the vacuum. So it's important to refresh and remember what we said on the last time. Here then, let me give you some retro descriptions on what is hypothesis. Generally, hypothesis is nothing, rather it is simply a predictions about the outcomes. Predictions of the outcome that are to be proved by either the experimental or other acceptable means. That you are having your study. Within your study, you are predicting that this one or this one might occur. So such kind of predictions regarding your parameters under consideration, that is what we call the hypothesis. So to prove the hypothesis, you need to carry out an experiment, so that at the end of the day, the experiment will prove whether you will fail to reject the null hypothesis or you will reject the null hypothesis. That is the hypothesis. It is also refers as a tentative predictions about the nature and the relationship between 2 or more variables. We have already discussed what is a variable from the earlier stages of our discussion. That you will have 2 or more variables of which you are not sure which one could be the truth and which one could be wrong. Therefore, you need to carry out an investigations such that you prove that this predictions is proper and this was is not proper. So that is what we call hypothesis. I want to go detail to this because it's not so difficult aspects. It is easy to capture, and it's my hope that this small aspect is not a trouble and not a problem to you. But my intention is here to these types of this hypothesis. Generally, hypothesis can be categorized into two main types, where we have the null hypothesis denoted by H naught, and we have the alternative hypothesis denoted by H1. When we speak of the null hypothesis, this is the kind of hypothesis, or is the statement, because hypothesis is two first statements. There are two statements, two constructing statements. The one which is stated to show that there is equality of the parameter, that all the parameter that you are going to make your study, that you are going to make experiment, you assume that before the result is out, you make an assumption that there is no any variation. Each and everything is almost equal. Okay, that show no variabilities, no difference that could exist between or among the variables under consideration. That is the null hypothesis. And this kind of hypothesis that normally we carry out hypothesis testing for it. It assumes that each and everything is okay. I will give you some examples, and these particular examples will be in the position to say, okay, this is good. And the other types is the alternative hypothesis then. This is almost the opposite of the null hypothesis. Under the alternative hypothesis, it is the opposing sentence that will speak of the existence of some variations between or among the parameters under consideration. Let me give you an example. Particularly, maybe you are carrying out a study on malaria. Let me use a simple, common example to everybody: a malaria. So you believe that there is an occurrence of a particular malaria in a certain place. Then your hypothesis could be that malaria has been accelerated due to higher rainfall. That could be your hypothesis, that malaria has been increased due to the higher raining situation to that particular area. That could be the hypothesis. So your another hypothesis could be that the higher the available kind of rain has got no any influence on a particular malaria. That malaria has not influenced by the rain. But the alternative one is rain has an influence on malaria. So you find that these two type of the hypothesis, they are trying to show that they are two statements which are contradicting ones, while the other is speaking of the neutrality, that nothing is there to make variation. Each and every aspect under consideration is neutral, while the alternatives is trying to tell us that there is a variation between the things that you are making your study. Let's further see more examples here. Taking you to this particular table, in this particular table, I'm going to give you a simple descriptions to give the difference between the research objectives, research questions, and the research hypothesis. Giving you with a typical examples. Suppose I had these three research objectives. My first objective was to determine tree species diversity. The second was to estimate tree stocking potential. And the last one was to assess soil dynamics. Stating of this hypothesis I did the last session. So if you're having problems on how to state, why do we use some verbs, why do we use it, you can refer to the Rusty series, which is series number 4 on my YouTube. You can get informed well on how to write a specific objectives. Then it is from the same specific objectives we create the research questions. And I will tell you, we don't use both research, whether research questions or research hypothesis. We opt whether we use the research objective or the research hypothesis. We opt one. After we have listed down our objectives, then what follows either the research question or the research hypothesis. It will depend on the format of the institution or the need of your supervisor or the need of the study itself. I will tell you what are the conditions that will tell us to opt for hypothesis or to opt for the research questions. But before we go, let's show some aspects on what the differences that could be easily recognized between research objective, research questions, and the research hypothesis. Taking these examples of the research objectives, from objective number 1, this is how the research question could be stated. That what type of tree species are found in the study sites? It ends up with the question mark. The objective was to determine tree species diversity. Now, which question am I going to answer? The question could be, what types of tree species are found in the study sites? Or there is another style. There are different styles of asking, but these are the two commons. Or you can make it in the other style, that is there significance difference of tree species in the study sites? This is a research question. What types? That's one style. The other style is there significance difference? These are the questions that will be asking yourselves, and at the end of the day, you need to answer them. Okay, how do you answer? You will answer by telling a study, making an investigations, so that at the end of the day you will find if they are there different type of species or not. On objective number 2 was to estimate tree stocking potential. So under this criteria, you can now formulate the question that what quantity does a tree carbon stocks in the study sites? That could be one of the styles on how you can make the questions. So from the same aspects, if you are asked to use a research hypothesis rather than research questions on these objectives, these are the styles of how you can make it. Under these points, mind you, we have two styles on how we can state the hypothesis. We have what we call the neutral phrase and what we call the directivity phrase. What do we mean by when we speak of the neutral phrase? When we speak of the neutral phrase, this is this kind of statement that will be giving you a neutral sentences that requires some investigation. And at this point, we simply state the null hypothesis, not the alternative ones. The null hypothesis, the one which is stated. To each objective should have a specified and specific null hypothesis. For instance, objective number 1 was to determine tree species diversity. Then its neutral phrase, you can say that tree species diversity do not vary in the study site. That is my assumption. That is my prediction. That is my hypothesis then. That there will be no any variations regarding tree species diversity. I am assuming that tree species diversity will be almost equal. There would be no. If it's one, it will be just only one. If it's a particular kind of tree, whether it is Acacia tortilis or the study side will be having Acacia tortilis. That is my null hypothesis, assuming that there is no variation. Okay. Or you can state it, tree species diversity are similar across the study sites. So this is the hypothesis now. There is no question mark. It is a sentence that is showing you some predictions, but stated in a null, indicating that each and everything is neutral. But also we can use a dialectivity kind of phrase. It will depend on you. This is where we use the word there is by replacing the word what is or is there. Then we say there is. Here it was is there, which is now a question. Now you make it in an opposite way, that there is. So how do you make it? There is no significance difference of tree species in a particular area. You find it how good it is bringing it to your mind now? There is no significance different. That is my assumption, my prediction, that there is no significance difference between tree species diversity in a proposed study site. So you can also find the other examples on the objective number 2, which is to estimate tree stocking potential, where you say the study site exhibiting no variations on tree stocking potential, or there is no significant variations or differences in tree species potential between or among the study sites. Those were some common typical examples from which you can now differentiate between the research questions and the hypothesis. Then let's see where and what condition do I use research questions or the research hypothesis. So generally, there are several conditions that may give you the suggestives and concretive aspects that under this particular study I should use a research question rather than a research hypothesis, or I should use hypothesis rather than the questions, though this might be influenced by the institution, the format, the supervisors, and others. Because some supervisors, you may make your own research questions, and he or she will ask you to state the hypothesis rather than the research questions. So because now you know that the research question, the hypothesis, they are sisters of the other mother. They are almost the same. What they differ is just how you phrase them. But all aspects are of the same. Is now easy for you to tune from the research questions to the research hypothesis. These are some of the parameters of which you need to consider. One could be the nature of the study or the data that you'll be dealing with, the aims of your study, or the types and the approach under which your research is in fact undertaken. On criteria like the aims, under this, research questions usually ask about the relationships or the point of interest in a general way. It simply asks the point of interest. What are you expecting to do on a particular parameters under study? But when you go to the research hypothesis, this asks the relationship between the two or more the variables in a specific way. When we go to the approach, research question is